Hello, everyone.
Hey there.
We'll getting started shortly.
Is it raining there?
It's stopped for now, but the sky is still pretty gray. How about where you are, Bob?
Yeah, it's raining. A little bit of snow last night, but yeah, it's going to rain right now, so we're gonna get that for the rest of the day.
All right.
All right, another 10 seconds to go or so. All right, and it's 10 o'clock, so we're going to begin this pre-cycle workshop. Good morning. My name is Havel Weidner, Associate Architect with the California Building Standards Commission. With me in the room today is Laura Mills, AGPA with the Building Standards Commission, who is managing the teleconferencing technology for this meeting. Welcome to the second Building Standards Commission workshop for non-residential standards pursuant to SB 745, the Drought Resistant Buildings Act. Today is November 20th, 2025, and this meeting is scheduled from 10 a.m., which it is now, until 2 p.m. with a break roughly around noon for lunch. Today's meeting is available via Zoom and teleconference as noted in the workshop notice and agenda. This meeting will also be live streamed on the Building Standards Commission's YouTube channel. Please be aware the live stream has an approximate 45-second delay, and there is no method for offering verbal or written public comment through the live stream. Closed captioning is available via Zoom's automated live transcriptions. To view closed captioning in Zoom, click on the CC Live Transcript button. Closed captioning will automatically appear if you are watching via YouTube. The meeting materials may be viewed on the Building Standards Commission's website as listed in the workshop notice and agenda. Now, Laura Mills will read the Zoom and telephone instructions.
Good morning, everyone. To avoid feedback or other technical issues, please join the meeting through one device only. Comments will first be taken from the public in Zoom with their hands raised, then from the public on the Zoom phone line. If you wish to make a comment on a specific agenda item, please listen for Havel to ask for any comments from the public. At this time, please virtually raise your hand using the raise hand icon in Zoom. You will be recognized by Havel in the order your hand was raised, or by me. At this time, please unmute yourself. When you are done speaking, please lower your hand and remute yourself. Please ensure that you have a microphone on or attached to your device prior to raising your hand to make a comment. We will continue through the queue until there are no raised hands remaining, then take comments from the public on the Zoom phone line. At this time, please unmute yourself. When you are done speaking, please remute yourself. When the phone comments are complete, CBSD staff will then proceed to the next agenda item. Please keep in mind the 4-minute time limit when making your comment. Please speak slowly and clearly so your comments can be transcribed. If you have any technical difficulties, please call our office, who we are in touch with, at 916-263-0916.
And does anyone have questions regarding the Zoom and telephone instructions? If so, you can raise your hand at this time. All right, if there are no questions at this time, I will proceed with the agenda items. All right, item 1, introduction and workshop overview. We've covered the introduction and workshop overview, and the following agenda items will further explain the purpose and structure of this workshop. Item 2, review updates to the workshop charter. And for that, I will share our updated workshop charter, which is available on the Building Standards Commission's website. I want to note a few changes in the workshop charter document. As it states at the top of the document, changes or additions to the workshop charter since the previous workshop are indicated with underlined text. And the first change I want to note is in the state agency subject matter experts section. The division of the state architect, or DSA, has been added to the subject matter experts portion of the charter with the following description of their role and authority. DSA has the statutory responsibility and authority to write CalGreen regulations for the built environment for non-residential construction, including California public schools and community colleges. DSA is a rulemaking entity and enforcement entity for public schools and community colleges. DSA is required to follow statutorily mandated procedures and propose regulations within their scope of authority and consistent with state law. DSA develops regulations based on executive action, and I see that I need to advance a page here. Based on executive action, legislative mandate, or a demonstrated need identified by DSA or proposed by others consistent with statute regulating rulemaking. DSA is required by Building Standards Law and the Administrative Procedure Act to evaluate the impact cost of proposed building standards on, including but not limited to, business, jobs, private persons, benefits to health, safety, and welfare, cost of compliance, estimated benefits, mandate on housing, local agencies, or school districts. And DSA provides many stakeholders and local authorities with technical assistance and training. I also want to point out at the bottom of the page the proposed schedule. And there haven't been any changes to the proposed schedule shown on the workshop charter. But I wanted to highlight the schedule for anyone who may be attending this workshop for the first time. As you can see in the schedule, we will be continuing to meet in these workshops until July 2026. And the intention is to discuss and develop standards in these workshops for the next triennial rule-making cycle in 2027 for publication in the 2028 California Building Standards Codes. I want to note this before we discuss the draft building standards that were shared in advance of this workshop to give an idea of how early in the development process these draft standards we are. Additionally, in the workshop participants section of the charter document, several organizations have been added to the list of workshop participants, included in the charter since our last meeting based on requests from those organizations. The added organizations are shown underlined. And if you would like your organization to be added to or removed from the workshop charter, please let us know with a comment during this workshop, or feel free to make a request in writing to the Building Standards Commission's contact email available on our website. And as I said, this charter document was shared in advance of the meeting and is available on our website. Does anyone have any comments on the updates to the workshop charter document at this time? Please raise your hand if so. And I see Thomas Enslow. Tom?
Yes, thanks. Just one comment on the charter. Right now, when we go to, hold on, let me just pull, let's see. On the purposes and goals, and when we go to workshop objectives, research and consider building standards for new residential buildings. Including requiring installation of water reuse systems and pre-plumbing. The actual SB 745 language in section 18940.7 calls for researching and proposing building standards, including voluntary tier 1 and tier 2 standards. That's the mandate. I raise that because I know the draft standards that you guys put out are just very initial standards out there for discussion, but they not only don't include any tier 1 or tier 2, they remove any existing tier 1 or tier 2 standards, which is, I think, very contrary to the intent of SB 745 as one of the sponsors of that bill. I represent the California State Pipe Trades Council. The intent was, we'll have certain mandatory standards, but the tier 1 and tier 2 standards are really important for two reasons. One, we want the REACH standards. We want to see where we're going, but also there may be some standards that are more appropriate for some jurisdictions rather than other jurisdictions because of their water availability or their other reasons why they may want to, or where it may be appropriate to adopt more stringent standards locally, but maybe not statewide. So that is why it was important in SB 745 that the standards that the Commission and HCD promulgate, are not just the mandatory ones, but are also our tier 1 and tier 2.
Thanks for that comment, Tom. I'm happy to add the specific language referencing both mandatory and voluntary standards from the SB 745 legislation to this workshop charter. That's definitely a change that we can make before our next workshop. The intent of that first paragraph bullet point was to encompass all the building standards that will be developed in this workshop process pursuant to SB 745, and was not intended to exclude the potential tier 1 and tier 2 standards. But I appreciate your comment, and will add language clearly indicating that tier 1 and tier 2 standards were a specific element of the SB 745 legislation to the charter. So I've got a note for that here.
Thank you.
Any other comments on the workshop charter?
If there's anyone on the phone, you may unmute yourself and speak now. Hearing none.
All right, we will move on to agenda item 3. The draft non-residential standards. We'll review the draft non-residential standards that the Building Standards Commission has prepared pursuant to SB 745 for potential inclusion in the 2028 Green Building Standards Code. I thought we could begin with an overview of our approach to these standards, similar to the overview in the regulatory roadmap, which we reviewed in the last workshop. And we can look at this brief graphical presentation we prepared. This presents the broad overview of the standards placement within and altering the existing Cal Green requirements. And so you can see that the draft standards include changes to both the existing mandatory and voluntary Cal Green requirements. And these requirements are located in Division 5.3 for the mandatory standards and Division A 5.3 for the voluntary standards. And those are shown in blue and green here for clarity, blue for the mandatory standards, green for the voluntary. And this is just sort of a very broad overview of the sections included in the water conservation Cal Green mandatory standards currently. All jurisdictions must comply with all of these existing mandatory requirements. And these are the voluntary divisions in A 5.3. And these are only required if adopted by a local jurisdiction. You can see that there is a overall compliance requirement for a percentage water reduction target, whether you're in Tier 1 or Tier 2. The percentage goes from 12 to 20% if you're in Tier 1 versus Tier 2. And then there are a number of existing electives that you can select from depending on whether you're in Tier 1 or Tier 2. One elective is required for Tier 1 compliance, and 3 electives are required for Tier 2 compliance. And there are a few examples of compliance here for the voluntary standards. So the voluntary Tier 1 regulation compliance would include complying with all of the mandatory standards, as well as the 12% water reduction target and 1 elective from the options available in Division A 5.3. That would be Tier 1. And these are the existing voluntary standards. And Tier 2, this is an example of Tier 2 compliance, would be similar, complying with the mandatory standards and the percent water reduction target, 20% in the case of Tier 2, along with 3 electives selected from Division A 5.3. And so together, those are the current existing Cal Green water efficiency and conservation standards in Division 5.3 and Division A 5.3. And the draft document that we shared as part of this workshop proposes changes to these standards that would remove the voluntary percentage reduction targets, bringing the standards more in line with residential standards, and would move a number of the current voluntary options into the mandatory Division 5.3 standards as options. And I misspoke there. Currently in Division A 5.3, the voluntary standards are electives. These are electives that can be selected in the voluntary Division A 5.3 standards, and they would become options if moved to the mandatory Division 5.3. And you can see that in the case of our draft proposal, the number of voluntary electives would be reduced, and the number of mandatory options would be increased, in this case, introduced as options for the first time in Division 5.3. And those would be placed in Section 5.305, water reuse systems, which is currently reserved. And just expanding on what that section would look like, you can see that there would be a series of options within the section from which project teams would select an option for compliance, with the intent being that, similar to the current Tier 1 and Tier 2 standards in the voluntary division, project teams are able to select the appropriate pathway for their project to compliance from this series of options, with one option satisfying compliance. And we have several examples of what that will look like later in the presentation. We also have in the scoping section of these mandatory options in our draft document a number of exceptions to avoid impacting communities which already utilize municipal scale water reuse projects in their potable water supply, communities which already have ordinances in place requiring the installation of water reuse systems, and projects where all the options for compliance are determined to be infeasible. The intent was to avoid creating burdensome regulation through this change in regulations. And we believe that with options and exceptions, we can give project teams the tools to do a path that works best for their project while also reducing potable water usage. And here is an example of compliance. So this would be compliance with the mandatory regulations, complying with all other mandatory sections in Division 5.3, as well as one option from Section 5.305. And so you can see in this case, selecting an outdoor recycled water supply system from the various options in Section 5.305 water reuse systems would provide a pathway for compliance. And similarly, without looking to significantly reduce the impact of Tier 1 and Tier 2 regulations, we've included in the scoping language for the voluntary standards in Division A 5.3 that the voluntary standards from which you could select to comply with Tier 1 and Tier 2 would no longer be limited to the elective options, the electives that are in Division A 5.3, but would be expanded to include the options being moved from Division A 5.3 into the mandatory standards in Division 5.3. And so here you can see under the draft standards language presented today, an example of Tier 1 compliance, which would include selecting one mandatory option, meeting the mandatory standards, as well as one additional option or elective. So an option from 5.3 or an elective from A 5.3. And you can see another example of that Tier 1 compliance change here, where a project team could choose their voluntary additional compliance standard from those mandatory options. So taking one mandatory option to comply with the mandatory portion of the standards and one option to comply with the Tier 1 voluntary portion of the standards. And also as an example of Tier 2, very similar strategy, selecting one mandatory option to meet the mandatory requirement and 3 additional mandatory options or voluntary electives to comply with the Tier 2 regulations. And so here you can see 2 options from 5.3 have been selected and 2 electives from A 5.3 have been selected to meet Tier 2 compliance. And because an additional elective has been included, the percentage water reduction target calculations are no longer a part of this process. And you can see another example of Tier 2 compliance with the single mandatory option and then 3 voluntary electives being selected. All right, and with that, we can move on to, actually, I see we have a hand. Bob, I see you have a comment.
Well, yeah, and maybe I'm early. I just wanted to comment on both what you're doing with the mandatory standards and what I now understand that you're doing with the voluntary standards. So if you want to complete your presentation, I can wait till the end, if that's okay.
This is the end of the
Oh,
slide presentation. I was going to move on to the actual text of the draft standards next. And
okay.
review standards
Well,
in detail.
well, then, yeah, it would be appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Bob Raymer. I'm representing the California Business Properties Association and the Building Owners and Managers Association. First, with regards to the voluntary stuff, you know, I had a similar concern as Tom indicated that there wasn't going to, you were going to move everything into the mandatory as options that you need to pick one, which we like. But I didn't understand that you were going to also kind of keep all that stuff warehoused in the tier 1 and the tier 2, so that once you pick your mandatory item in the mandatory standards, if a jurisdiction adopts you know, tier 1 or tier 2, you're still going to have access to other items that you haven't installed as a mandatory. And so that's good to understand. I don't know if that takes care of Tom's concern, but it's good to know that all those are also going to remain as additional things that you could do depending on what the local jurisdiction adopts. So that's fine. Regarding your proposed changes to the mandatory standards, you know, implementation of 745 represents sort of a big step here. You know, in the past, for decades, we've been taking like you know, fixtures. You know, we've taken the faucet in the bathroom, we've taken the faucet in the kitchen, and especially the toilet and the urinals, and we've slowly kind of decrease the amount of water used per minute, per flush, et cetera, or in some cases, no flush at all. And so we like the strategy of starting out, now that we're going to be doing things that are kind of new, that you haven't been doing in the mandatory stuff. We like the effort to sort of do what we did with the material conservation provisions, you know, where we kind of ramped up the percentage of material that needs to be kind of siphoned off to recycling or reuse facilities. And particularly with EV charging, you know, when we first kicked that off in 2015, you know, we had about 3 to 4 years of a lot of confusion. You know, industry needed to figure out what is going on, while some jurisdictions had already started doing some stuff. For the most part, industry, you know, we had a big learning curve, and that's why it was good that you kind of start off with 3% and then 5%, et cetera, with the EV charging. And I like the approach of doing that here. Yeah, down the road, we're going to be doing a lot more of this stuff, but we need industry and the building officials, you know, both to kind of understand how this stuff works, how it complies, what is best for a particular project. And your approach here is giving them that initial opportunity to, you know, get up and close and personal with the proposed mandatory standards and figure out what is the best one for my project. You know, how can I maximize my water conservation and minimize the cost or whatever for a particular project, which you're doing here, you know, with the full understanding that as time goes on, as it always does, you know, with you know, the Green Building Code, things are going to ramp up and up and up. So thank you very much for the proposal. And I would be interested in Tom Inslow's comments on whether or not the retaining of this stuff and the voluntary provisions answers his question as well, because I didn't know that you were doing that, and I'm glad to see that you are. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment, Bob. And I do see we have Tom's hand up. So Tom, if you'd like to either respond or make a comment yourself.
Yeah, I have a number of comments. First, just to Bob's question, whether that the tier 1, the tier 2 provisions that you discussed answer my question. I mean, they do, to the extent that we're not completely removing stuff from tier 1 to tier 2, but they don't, in that we're not putting anything new in those tiers. We're not putting anything new that is addressing the mandate of SB 745, and I think there needs to be some substantive provisions put in there. I did provide the Commission comments yesterday on these proposals and proposed in some proposed alternative measures, which I hope will get distributed to the stakeholder group so we can discuss maybe in the next meeting. But on the specific, a couple of specific questions on here. One, you know, what you move into the mandatory, you know, taking out the 15% reduction requirement doesn't make sense to me. Right now, you say that you can meet this just by putting in non-water urinals. Well, you don't even have to have urinals in a building. A building could just put in one non-water urinal and then say they've met this. And we're not really going to be reducing anything. You know, I think you need you need if you're going to use this approach, which I'm suggesting a slightly different approach. But if you're going to use this approach, we at a minimum need that 15% reduction so that whatever voluntary measures, whatever measures they choose are sufficient to actually reduce building potable water use. And then just another issue that I think's really concerning is the proposed exception for communities which already utilize municipal scale water reuse. There's never been an exception like that in the code. The codes are the codes. There's not an exception in SB 745. And what's concerning about that is there's no percentage there. I mean, a municipal, you know, a municipal utility could have like 0.001% of their water being water reuse water, and then none of the buildings have to reduce their potable water use. It makes no sense. And the governor's been very clear that we're facing severe water shortages in the next, you know, 10 to 30 years, and he wants to drought-proof the buildings now. So we're ready because it takes years for a building stock to change. And if we're, you know, and he's also been clear that, you know, all the tools need to be on the table. And so it's not enough that a municipal utility is reusing water, recycling water. We also need to make sure a new building demand is as low as possible. And we're talking about new buildings here. So I don't see any basis for that exception, and it seems arbitrary and not based on any meaningful policy.
Thanks for the comment, Tom. And we did receive your written comment as well yesterday, and we will distribute that to this workshop group. We're working on setting up our collaboration platform that we discussed or was requested at the last workshop, where stakeholders can input documents that they want the entire group to have access to and review and provide feedback on. I'm also happy to add your full comment as a discussion item in our next workshop, just so that we have a dedicated time to discuss it. Just briefly in response, with regards to your concern about the exception for municipalities that have a water reuse program as part of their potable water supply. That was a concern that was expressed early on by the State Water Resources Control Board in our communicating with them about this potential proposal. And it would definitely be useful to get additional feedback from them on their specific concerns, and if there's a way realistically that a percentage threshold can be put on that exception to avoid your concern, which is that, you know, a 0.01% contribution of water reuse to a potable water supply would satisfy that exception, which is certainly not the intent. So we'll look to communicate further about your comment, and your comment is appreciated, and we understand your concerns. So thank you for that. And I see, Bob, you have your hand up again.
Yes. With regards to Tom's comment on the tier 1 and tier 2, you know, with the Energy Commission over the years, they have, you know, every year or every update, they've moved voluntary option measures that we could use to put flexibility into our compliance. They've moved one or more of those into the mandatory section without backfilling the options that you've got here. And I like Tom's suggestion that to the extent possible, and we can actually get good code language, that precisely describes the option. I like the idea of putting new things for consideration as options into the tier 1 and tier 2 regs. That's kind of where we're going to feed from as we move things over into the mandatory provisions. And unlike the Energy Commission, which we have very few options left anymore, so it's becoming largely a prescriptive standard, even though it's quote performance. And so I like Tom's idea there. Of course, we're going to need to get the proposal and the language fixed up. But regarding the other stuff, I also can appreciate the desire to have some guardrails put on the exceptions. I don't like the idea of getting rid of the exception, but certainly we can put some guardrails on it to make sure that somebody isn't misusing it in the way that Tom describes, because somebody could. So once again, I'm going to take a look at Tom's letter. I've just got it. And so, over the next week or two, I'll get you back some comments. But, I like his idea on the voluntary stuff, backfilling the vacancies that we create with the mandatory measures. And I'll take a look at some, putting some guardrails in for the exceptions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I see Megan has a hand up as well. Megan Murphy.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
This is Megan Murphy with the California Municipal Utilities Association. I was just curious if you could speak to the process on potentially looking at the cost and the cost effectiveness of some of these regulations and requirements, especially if you would consider an additional exception if there's really not, if there's a huge lack of cost effectiveness for perhaps the city or the county or the water agency or the commercial building that would be implementing some of this. And I know you just spoke to the timeline. I was wondering if that was incorporated in some of the analysis here.
Yeah, to address your question about cost, that's actually something that I intended to bring up later on in this agenda. I didn't have time to make it onto the agenda before it was posted. But we did have a request to discuss economic and fiscal impact information, which I believe you're speaking to, and which the Building Standards Commission will need to provide as part of the rulemaking documents related to these regulations. And I was going to request at this workshop that any assistance or information that the interested parties participating and present in this workshop can provide related to potential cost impacts resulting from the draft regulations be shared with the commission and would be very useful in our work. And we're happy to work with interested parties to provide relevant cost information on the specifics of on these draft regulations. So we will be assessing the economic and fiscal impact of the regulations as part of the rulemaking process. We haven't begun to look at that information yet for these draft regulations. And as we continue to refine the regulations, we'll have a better sense of what those impacts may be. Additionally, to your question about an exception specifically for cost, in the draft standards language, we do have that infeasibility exception. And part of the description of that infeasibility exception is cost infeasibility. And I'll point that out when we review the specific language of the draft standards. But the intention was that the standards not become cost burden to projects. So I'll go over that in specific detail when we reach that portion of the draft standards. And I appreciate your comment.
Great, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, I see Jerry Desmond.
Hey, Jerry, you're on mute.
Oh, Jerry, you're muted.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Jerry Desmond here on behalf of Plumbing Manufacturers PMI. First to note that we would certainly appreciate being included as a stakeholder, going forward. And then just a couple of quick observations as our members are looking at the movement, proposed movement of non-water urinals over to mandatory. We're checking with our members in terms of the amount of supply that's out there in a competitive environment to make sure that that will be workable. And then we're also it's not in one of the drafts, but we're also just looking at the increased interest and availability of having potable water to the urinal, or I mean to the water closet in a commercial setting. And how that fits into this. We're looking into that a little bit further too. So we don't have a specific recommendation or request at this time. We're just entering into the conversation, and we'll look forward to participating going forward as well.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, I'll be sure to add you to the workshop charter as an interested party. And as I said, we're early in our development process, that schedule that we referenced at the beginning. So happy to have your feedback as we continue with this process. Thank you for your comment. Bob, I see your hand.
Yeah, Bob Raymer with CBPA and BOEM again. And in response to Megan's request, I'm sure we'll get to this later, but I just wanted to let you know that CBPA and BOEM is, we're, as state associations, we're going to be going out to our members once, maybe twice, with requests for some cost information. However, as I've already mentioned to BSC staff, we're going to need some help on how to word this stuff and how to illustrate it. And so in the coming meetings, it would be very helpful to get a little precision from others, stakeholders, on what we go out to our membership with. And we also need to go out to the water companies as well. And State Water Resources Control Board already has some data that they put together with their recent regs on this. I mean, as early as like a week and a half ago. What we need to do is kind of look at all of these different things, from industry, from water, and from State Water Resource Control Board, and kind of get a feel for this. Because, as it was already said, BSC is going to need to have this in their statement of reasons going forward. But I just want to limit the number of times that I go out to the commercial membership and ask them this question, and I'm going to need some help in doing that. So once again, thank you. And that's my comment.
Thank you, Bob. And I will bring that topic up for general discussion later on in the meeting if there's anything that hasn't been fully discussed regarding retrieving or collecting cost and economic data for this set of draft regulations. Jerry, I still see your hand up, but I'm assuming that's from before. Do you have a further comment, Jerry Desmond? Okay, and I see your hand's gone down. Is there anyone on the phone at this time?
We're currently having an issue with the phone number that was provided. So,
Okay.
It appears that Zoom has changed the availability of call-in. I just created a test meeting and there is no call-in number. So, I'm working on this with people at the office.
Okay.
And we will, if there are people who are trying to call in, who are listening, you should call our office so that we have your name and number, and we will get back to you with a solution as soon as we can.
I think we had also discussed at one point that phone callers, we may be able to have someone at the office hold them up to our meeting.
Correct.
Yeah, and communicate that way. That's okay. Well, that's good to know about. So if you are watching and are trying to call in via telephone, please call the
office.
Building Standards Commission office. And that phone number,
916-263-0916.
perfect. Thank you, Laura. All right, well, if there are no further comments on this slide presentation, I will move on to the language of the draft standards themselves. And I think we can look at them in this format. Looks like we do have a call for the main line.
Kevin is testing different numbers that I provided him that we can get up onto the website. Or we can just read it out here.
Okay, well,
Did Kevin go away? Did
he
the
may
phone
be
caller,
busy.
the
He may
phone
be
caller
busy
go away?
managing that.
Okay.
Phone call. So this is the draft non-residential standards document that was shared in advance of this meeting. And I'll walk through it. It aligns with the presentation that we just discussed, which presents this information in kind of an overview format. The legend for draft standards, you can see that the existing language appears upright. The amended or new amendments will appear underlined. Repealed language will appear in upright and strikeout. And ellipses indicate existing text that remains unchanged. So there are portions of text that are omitted for sake of brevity. And there's a lot of descriptive text just to provide the background or thought process behind the regulatory draft presented here in red and italicized. And so this would be for inclusion in the 2028 Green Building Standards Code, Title 24, Part 11. You can see in Chapter 2 of Part 11, the definitions, a few definitions relevant to this set of regulations have been added. Going back to the exception that we spoke about earlier for municipalities that are including water reuse as a portion of their potable water system, you can see that direct potable reuse project and indirect potable reuse project are terms used in that exception, and they're defined here in Chapter 2. There is also the definition for on-site treated non-potable water, which is currently adopted by the Building Standards Commission, Cal Green, in the California Plumbing Code. And so this is provided here for conformity with the plumbing code and for reference by the code user. And it may change if required to by the discussions we have here and input of our interested parties. But we wanted to provide this definition that's currently in the plumbing code for conformity with the plumbing code. And moving on to Chapter 5, the non-residential mandatory measures. You can see here Division 5.3, the water efficiency and conservation standards. Those definitions that I just described are referenced in the definitions at the beginning of Division 5.3, Section 5.302, definitions. And then in Section 5.305, the water reuse systems previously reserved, we've included our new mandatory options and scoping language for those options, which would be the regulations developed pursuant to SB 745 presented here in draft. And so the following changes to Section 5.305 would bring many of the voluntary electives from Voluntary Division A5.3 into the mandatory Cal Green standards as options for compliance. However, like the existing voluntary standards, only one option must be selected for a project to comply. The range of different options to choose from allows project teams to select a pathway to compliance that best suits their project. Exceptions have been provided to avoid impacting communities which already utilize municipal scale water reuse projects and a potable water supply, or which already have ordinances in place requiring the installation of water reuse systems. An exception has also been provided for projects where all the options for compliance are infeasible. And so this is that scoping language, essentially requiring that new non-residential construction will comply with one of the options presented in the following sections. And these are those exceptions specifically. And so you can see exception 1 is the section that Tom expressed concerns about, where the potable water supply serving the project is delivered by a public water system which utilizes water or water sources from an indirect potable reuse project or a direct potable reuse project. This section does not apply. And so that was a broad exception for municipalities which are already conserving potable water through a municipal scale water recycling project that then goes directly back into the potable water supply. And it's something that it sounds like we'll be discussing further with the State Water Resources Control Board and this workshop group. And then this second exception is the infeasibility exception. And so this is where all systems and installations described in sections 5.305.2 and 5.305.3, those are the mandatory options sections, are determined to be not feasible for the project as demonstrated by the project design team and approved by the authority having jurisdiction. No system or installation is required. A system or installation may not be feasible due to costs exceeding 10% of total project cost, lack of rainwater, gray water, or recycled water resources at the project site, physical constraints of the project site, or other considerations approved by the authority having jurisdiction. And so, Megan, to your question about situations where these regulations present infeasibility due to cost, there is an exception that's been provided there. And this is meant to provide projects where these systems are just entirely unfeasible, a way to still meet the regulatory requirements. And then the last exception deals with municipalities that already have local amendments requiring systems described in the following mandatory options. And so where a local municipality is already requiring the installation of one of these systems for potable water use, they would not be required to provide additional systems or installations based on this section. And we've provided information in these mandatory option sections, just indicating the relocation from the elective section. The text has been expanded in some cases for clarity and makes reference to other related codes, frequently the California Plumbing Code. So we have our option for non-water urinals, an indoor recycled water supply system, and in the recycled water supply system sections, we've also included language regarding pre-plumbing. So in the case that it is anticipated that recycled water will become available to the project site in the future, the project shall be pre-plumbed indoors with dual piping for potable and non-potable recycled water to comply with this section. And so essentially the intention was for project sites that wish to utilize this option of indoor recycled water supply, if recycled water is available to the project site, then potable water supply and recycled water supply system shall both be provided. If the recycled water is anticipated to become available to the project site, then a potable water system and pre-plumbing for recycled water supply system shall be provided. And either of those would meet the intent of this option. And there's just a reference here, I think for the This is allowable uses of recycled water currently allowed in the plumbing code. And so the following uses would be allowed indoors and currently are per the plumbing code: water closets, urinals, trap primers for floor drains and floor sinks, industrial or commercial cooling of air conditioning, and other uses as allowed by Title 22, including commercial laundries, commercial car washes, where the public is excluded from the washing process, industrial processes, or industrial or commercial cooling systems. So those are all currently allowed uses of recycled water that systems could be installed to comply with this mandatory option. Another option for on-site treated non-potable water systems. And you'll notice for a number of these, we have both indoor and outdoor applications as separate options. So there's an option for an on-site treated non-potable water system. And then a set of outdoor water use options. And so an outdoor recycled water supply system with similar pre-plumbing potential if recycled water supply is anticipated to become available to the project site. Rainwater catchment system is another option. On-site treated non-potable water irrigation system. So this would be using on-site treated non-potable water in an outdoor setting, or a simple or complex gray water system as described in the California Plumbing Code. And so those would be the mandatory options from which a project team would select for compliance. And with this first iteration of these regulations for the 2028 Cal Green standards, it's just one option currently, as described in our slide presentation. And then looking at the voluntary measures in Appendix A5, Division A5.3, there is just some scoping language we noticed was missing that it would be useful to add to the section. And then regarding the percentage reduction targets, the following changes to section 8.5.303 would eliminate the water use percentage reduction targets, 12%, 20%, 25% from the Cal Green voluntary standards. The intent is that greater water use reduction will now be part of the mandatory Cal Green standards in section 5.305. When the voluntary percentage reduction targets were originally included in Cal Green, the baseline flow rates for plumbing fixtures were much higher, but these have since been reduced. As a result, further flow rate reduction beyond the baseline may not be practical given available plumbing fixtures and may not provide adequate flow for fixtures and plumbing systems to function sufficiently. This change would also better align the non-residential Cal Green standards with the residential Cal Green standards, as the voluntary percentage reduction targets were removed from the residential sections rulemaking several rulemaking cycles ago. A number of other elective sections are being removed from the voluntary standards because an equivalent section has been added to the mandatory standards in section 5.305. And language is added such that the electives in mandatory section 5.305 can be selected to satisfy the voluntary tier 1 and tier 2 requirements. So that's that compliance selection of options for tier 1 and tier 2 that we looked at in the slide deck, where the mandatory options are choices that project teams can use to meet tier 1 and tier 2 requirements. And so you can see the water use baseline calculation tables would be removed, are shown as stricken, as well as the percent target reduction information. And then the existing voluntary electives to remain would be renumbered as the bulk of content in Division A 5.3. And you can see where many of the standards are relocated to the mandatory options. And then we get to the scoping element of tier 1 and tier 2. And this is where the language has been added to specify that the mandatory options are also available as choices to satisfy tier 1 and tier 2 requirements. And so you can see that this change will remove the water usage reduction calculations from the voluntary CalGreen tiers shown on the checklist. Language is also added so that electives relocated from the voluntary tiers to the mandatory options for compliance in section 5.305 can still be taken to meet the additional voluntary requirements. In addition to the options in section 5.305, tier 1 and tier 2 requirements could be met using the following electives, which would remain in the voluntary standards of division A5.3. And the remaining voluntary electives are listed below. And you can see there is additional scoping information that clarifies that tier 1 and tier 2 compliance choices are selected from either the options or the electives in either division A5.3 in the case of electives, or section 5.305.2 or 5.305.3 in the case of the mandatory options. And that's the end of this current regulatory draft. And that was just a brief overview. The draft text is available on our website at the link provided as part of this meeting invite. And I'll open up the floor to any comments that our interested parties group here today might have.
I have a phone number I can share if people want to call in.
Oh, sure, that might be useful, yeah. If you'd like to call in to comment, Laura will share the phone number to call.
All right, so within the United States, 408-961-3928 or 408-961-3929.
Okay, excellent. So please feel free to call those numbers if you're reaching us by telephone. And I see, Tom, you have your hand up on Zoom.
Yes, thank you. I'm allowed to comment on here, but I'm going to start with this removal of the 15, 20%, 25% water reduction requirements, and then how the tier 1 have, the options of, 1 to 3 more additional options. I guess, first of all, this concern, I mean, I get the issue about, where right now the 15, 20, 25% reduction requirements are focused on fixtures. And it seems like that needs to be changed to focus on overall building use. IAPMO has a water use calculator for buildings and new building construction. And that can be used to figure out, what options would reduce water use in the building by what percentage. And it does seem that we need, because the big issue I have with these different options is they vary widely in how much water they're going to save. So they're not equivalent. So you're given these options that are very inequivalent as far as their effectiveness and how much water they're going to save. And I think we need to focus on, at the end of the day, how much water are we really saving? And I think there needs to be some minimum reduction requirements. And I think I would suggest we look at the IAPMO water use calculators as a way to kind of calculate that and to shift these percentages, instead of getting rid of them, shift them from focusing on just the fixtures to overall water use. So that'd be one comment. The other comment is, again, I'm concerned, for example, tier 3, you're going to have 4 of these options you would have to pick, but many of these options overlap. you want to do more than one of them because I mean, you're not going to do outside recycled water and gray water. You're not going to do inside recycled water and on-site, treated water, or pre-plumbing, or I mean, they overlap so much, so it's not really where you're going to choose more than one of them. And again, they vary widely in how much water they're saving. It should be, I think we need to look at, which of these are going to save the most water. And as we talk going into, tier 1 and tier 2, people should be given more credit for adopting a option that's going to save a lot more water. I mean, if you're going to do an on-site treated, gray water system or black water system, realistically, that should be enough. You shouldn't have to do 3 other options, because that's going to be saving way more water than the other options. So I think you need to, we need to reconfigure, this whole process to be based on what are the water savings and where we're trying to go, and to give credit for taking options that are going to save more water.
Thank you for that comment.
Hello, Havel. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Mike Kuros here. I finally got a chance to call in. Well, let me know when to this previous comment.
Yes, we'll call for people on the phone after people in the Zoom are done speaking. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Tom, for your comment. We'll look at the IAPMO water reduction calculator and kind of a whole building strategy as a potential. That is certainly not an element of the draft that we're looking at today, and that's something that we could look at in future drafts and for discussion in this workshop. So thank you for that comment. I see Eli or Ellie.
Yes, thank you. So I'm with University of California System. So we distributed the draft language out. The number one response that we got is concern about the indoor water use option, the non-water urinals. Basically, these have a lot of problems, either with that a lot of maintenance costs because of the need to replace cartridges, or if they're not plumbed well, then they have a lot of problems with the plumber. So I just wanted to raise that concern, and it would not be the best course to just mandate non-water urinals. There's good options with very low flow urinals.
Thank you for that comment, Eli. We'll look at that sort of issue. That's not the first time I've had concern raised about the functionality, the practicality of non-water urinals related to these standards. I will point out that they would be an option from several different options, which was part of the intent, was to allow project teams to pick the pathway to compliance that works best for their team. But I appreciate that feedback. Thank you. Bob, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. Bob Raymer with CBPA and BOMA. I'm not saying I disagree with Tom's comments. I do think that down the road, we're going to need, some measure of, or measures or ways of sort of measuring the potable water savings. To the extent that we need to do that the first time out, I'm not sure. I think we're taking a major step here, as I said earlier, and to the extent that we can make it as simple and easy to implement and enforce. Keep in mind that it's not just the designers and the developers and the builders that are doing this. It's got to be something that can be enforced by local jurisdictions. So there's a learning curve here. So I do agree that in subsequent updates, we're definitely going to need to start sort of measuring the success of here and basically making sure that there is a minimum level, at least a minimum level of success that's achieved. Whether or not that needs to be done during the first iteration of these standards, I'm still out there. If the BSC was to consider doing this, I do hope that there will be multiple ways on which industry can use to show these savings or whatever. I'm sure IAPMO has a good proposal. I'm completely unfamiliar with it. I did a little review of Appendix M, back in the day when we were getting it into HCD's regs. But quite frankly, I've never really used it. So once again, I'm kind of thinking if I haven't used it, there's probably a whole lot more in the industry that need to get up to speed as well. So I'm kind of halfway there. Not all the way, but that's kind of where we're coming from now. We like the approach the BSC is using for the first iteration of the standards. As I've mentioned to you already, I think this is a great first step. But I need to look at Tom's letter once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I see Kevin, your hand.
Yeah, good morning, Hobble. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Kevin Day, Deputy Executive Director with the California Building Standards Commission. We got a request from a participant, and this is just a request. It's voluntary, not mandatory. But if the folks that are in the Zoom, in the Zoom meeting can add their affiliation or organization next to their name, just for identification purposes. But again, it is not mandatory. It's just a request. So just
would that be in the chat? So like in the chat, we'd put our name and our affiliation?
No, there's no chat, just like you have, Bob, with your name.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay.
You're already doing it. And a
Okay.
lot of people are. I think there's just some people who don't know who each other are. And so yes, like Annika just did. Yeah.
And again, it's not mandatory, just a request. So just want to throw that out there. I think we can now go to Mr. Quiroz and any others on the phone. Laura, thank you so much.
Well,
Yes.
thank you. When you're ready, Michael Quiroz, representing Laborers International Union of North America and proudly representing their local affiliates here in California. So a couple of quick comments, and unfortunately, I was one of the ones that ran into the issues with the phone system. Not your problem. It was a problem on the other end, apparently, with Zoom. So comments, and we keep using the word mandate, and we haven't even entered into the process of cost-benefit analysis and where, I keep hearing how much water is this going to save, and I think the bigger question is how much money is this going to save to validate the water cost. That we know is a very important question as we move through this process of moving forward, if it does move forward, to meet that number. The second part of this question is how we look at this in the bigger picture is we just now, as of yesterday, have 150% of our annual rainfall up until this date. We do have our cyclical dry years. We understand that. And in those dry years, we hopefully depend on more water storage and water storage systems that are out there, which are, quite frankly, a lot more of an economic benefit than some of the things that we're discussing right now. That's not me just saying that, that's just a proven fact. And then the next thing I'm going to add is as we move through this discussion, I think what we're missing is, and this is the $64,000 question and statement, is what is it that we're trying to achieve right now that we can't do already right now? I keep hearing about design and who's going to design it. And the reality is many of these systems are already being installed right now. And even if all this goes through, the reality is the systems will still be installed in the manner that they're being installed and approved by the local jurisdiction having authority. And that is, it is alternative means and methods. There is not going to be any prescriptive methodology to any of the systems that we're talking about, okay? That's a simple fact. And with the design professionals who are out there and the manufacturers of all the components that have to be approved and recognized that go into these systems, wherever they're applicable, then I think that's something that we need to be taking into consideration right now as we evaluate this and come back with a report as to whether or not, and again, in terms of my opinion as to what the SB 745 is requiring us to do is to do a study. And if at the end analysis, that study, we come back with an answer, and that is, well, we can do it right now. And we can do it, and we can do it a lot more economically and a lot more feasibly by saving the cost benefit of cost of water that is coming from the local water provider. At the end of the day, if they can supply it, and it's a lot more economically beneficial than all the things that we're trying to create right now in this discussion, then we know which side of that discussion it's going to move towards. And then I think we keep talking about occupancies and buildings. And I think we need to go back to the pure definition of what occupancies are going to be impacted by the things that we're talking about right now. We talk about residential, non-residential, and we're talking about mixed use. But we all know that in that process, there are definitions of those residential descriptions as by occupancies as well as the commercial side. I know staff is very well aware of that. Kevin, you're very well aware of that, and I think that's something that should be applied before we have our next teleconference, our next meeting, so we can start more definitively looking at as to where the intended applications may be in occupancies.
Thank you for that comment, Michael. I guess just a clarifying question, in terms of occupancies, these standards currently would apply to all non-residential projects for which the Building Standards Commission, Cal Green, has authority. Is there additional nuance to the occupancy considerations that you're looking for?
Well, let me ask you a question to that point. Would that also include the California Residential Code, the prescriptive requirements?
It would not at this time.
Okay, so then, so we need to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. And again, the types of occupancies that would be constructed, low income types of projects that are subsidized. We're looking at maybe HUD developed projects, all the things that Bob Raymer is very well familiar with. When you say residential, I think the clarity of specifically as to what types of residential projects is defined within both the international or the California Building Codes and the other elements that affect residential code, the code should be applied to it. I think we need to be more specific to give the jurisdictions having authority the direction as to how they look at this.
Well, I appreciate that comment. And these standards would be specific to the buildings for which the Building Standards Commission, Cal Green, has authority. And so it would not include residential occupancies. These draft standards that we presented today would be strictly for non-residential occupancies for which the Standards Commission has authority.
That was a very important question in my mind. Thank you for clarifying that, because despite how much coffee I drank this morning, I still wasn't clear on it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate as well your comment about the cost of water storage systems and efficacy and cost of municipal scale water systems. And we'll look to make that a part of our consideration in the economic and fiscal analysis that we do related to these regulations.
And again, nobody's opposed to saving water or any of the systems that are clearly out there and being applied. In fact, laborers, we have been supportive of this concept for many, many years and involved with it for many, many years around the country. But we also know that the design professionals that are out there work closely with the engineers that are specific to designing these types of projects. And their biggest obstacle has not been the fact that they had to have the local jurisdictions look at it and approve it as much as those manufacturers weren't clear as to what direction they needed to go to in terms of getting those components in the systems approved. They had the impression they could walk in and it was a prescriptive application, and we all know that 99% of what we would apply in this situation, no matter how you look at it, if you were to put it in the International Plumbing Code or Uniform Plumbing Code in either case, it still would be under alternative means and methods, because there is no prescriptive manner of being able to design any of the systems that we're talking about. And then one important quick question that came back on the waterless urinals and those filters from the individual from the university. That's a significant part of what I think we need to be looking at in terms of the maintenance of these systems, because this is a significant part of maintaining the entire public health and safety umbrella that we have to be looking at as we move through this. And I know Tom Ensel thinks that they have the answer, but I think in the bigger picture, we need to be looking at this as, you know, in the totality of how do we maintain the performance of these systems to the degree that we don't have a similar situation that we had in Monterey with the battery systems that were moved into one building when they should have only had X amount of batteries stored in those buildings, because there was no maintenance of those systems overseeing that. And this is even a far more potentially grievous situation if we allow any contaminated water to enter into the public system.
Thank you for that comment. Yeah, that does echo the concerns that we have discussed with the State Water Resources Control Board and the Department of Water Resources. And they do have Title 22 and Plumbing Code regulations that look to prevent the kind of public health incident that you're describing. But I appreciate your comment.
Yeah, just last comment on that. It becomes the boots on the ground, the face of
right.
The regs mean something, but what is what I'm saying? The actual physical, you got to have somebody there, maintaining it, and where that won't be the local jurisdiction, because once they sign off on it, we do know, and I think you can clarify this, and this is my last comment with the water districts, that they do have jurisdiction. Many of these water districts that supply both potable and non-potable water, however, whatever definition is being used, that they do have jurisdiction over ensuring the integrity of the quality of that water ongoing. And that is I do believe under Title 22. You can check with them, and I think that's a question that should be asked. If that's currently on the situation, then maybe that applies here.
Well, I appreciate your comments. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
I see Tom, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. A couple things. First of all, all the systems that are listed in these options and that are being proposed are already approved to be installed in the plumbing code, already have specific prescriptive regulations and what they need to meet, both under Title 22 and under Title 24, and are already being constructed, in California in certain jurisdictions. So the claim that these are alternate material approvals and alternate material systems just is completely incorrect. What the mandate of SB 745 is to drought-proof buildings, is to reduce the building, indoor building potable water use. That is the mandate. That's separate than the mandates to water utilities to also, find ways to use alternative water and to reduce the use. It's all hands on deck here. One doesn't preclude the other, and the legislature has, taken that into consideration and provided a mandate to the Building Standards Commission, under their jurisdiction, which is just building standards. And so what we're looking at here is how do we reduce potable water use and building standards, and how do we drought-proof buildings for the future, because we know what's coming down the line in the next 30, 40 years, and we want to make sure buildings are prepared to use alternative water systems, because it's too expensive to retrofit them when the time comes. So just to kind of, set the baseline there. One issue that was raised about occupancy, which is something that, when we discuss maybe in the next time around our proposals, is part of SB 745 is that there was a direction to look at, should standards be, different standards be applied to different size buildings, or different types of occupancies. And also, what hasn't been done here is we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There are already local jurisdictions that have adopted water reuse ordinances, particularly San Francisco and Sacramento, and we should be looking at those for the baseline, for showing us how we should proceed. And what they do is they have higher standards for larger buildings. And so when I look at what's been proposed, I don't oppose it as far as this applies to everything. It's very weak in my opinion, but as far as applying to all size buildings, maybe it's okay, but there needs to be more. And I think what needs to be looked at is, when, for example, in San Francisco, buildings over 100,000 square feet have to put in water reuse systems. Buildings over in Sacramento, buildings over 50,000 square feet have to pre-plumb to be ready to use recycled water or on-site treated water systems. So I think we need to not treat every size building the same. I think let's look at what local jurisdictions have done and what works for them, and use that as a template. And we've been directed by the legislature to and authorized by the legislature to adopt different standards for different size buildings, if that makes sense. And I think that also addresses kind of the cost effectiveness issue. So just want to throw that out there for discussion next time.
Havel, if I may quickly make a couple of quick responses.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go for it, Michael.
Okay, quick. Sure. First off, this is the legislature, SB 745 is not a mandate, nor does it mandate that we proceed forward without doing the study. And that is what the bill intends us to do, perform a study. And that is what we're doing. It's not a mandate. And when we're through with the study and it moves forward and eventually to the commission, with recommendations by all the different agencies that are dialed in and part of this process, then that decision will be made. So putting the cart before the horse is not really in the best interest of the process. The second part is I'm pretty familiar, ironically, believe it or not, with the International Plumbing Code and the Uniform Plumbing Code. I'm very, very involved with the Uniform Plumbing Code from day one. And I can say that there is nothing prescriptively in terms of a system that we're talking about within the Uniform Plumbing Code in any way, shape, or form. And I'm saying that from a technical perspective. This is not argumentative with the previous speaker. This is just a simple fact. If that were the case, then IATMO's if services that look at and approve each of the components that go into those systems would probably be right now having heartburn, not to mention those systems that are accredited and put forward in the totality of the manufacturers of the storage systems, et cetera, et cetera. So the authority having jurisdiction ultimately accepts these systems, and they look at each part of it as IATMO has tested it and approved each part of that system. And you cannot build a system, and I'm very much involved with the development of a lot of these systems around the country. If you build one of these systems in Pasadena, California, and you build another one, say somewhere up out in Thousand Oaks, there are going to be two different types of designs based on the locality, the type of occupancy, And there are a lot of other physical impacts that would come to that system's design by the design professional that the authority having jurisdiction would have to look at and approve under alternative means and methods. That's the process, folks. That's not counter argument to the previous comments by the previous speaker. That's just a fact for those of us that actually go out and do this day by day.
Understood. Well, thank you for your response there, Michael, and thank you for your comments, Tom. We'll consider, and certainly after we've shared your written comments, Tom, with the group and the ordinances from San Francisco and Sacramento, we'll certainly look at size of building as a possible way to determine which of these standards are in effect. I appreciate that comment. Are there any additional comments or phone comments on the draft regulations that we reviewed? All right.
Seeing none.
Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 4. And agenda item 4 is an additional consideration. We received a written comment from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, the SFPUC, regarding exempting untreated gray water for subsurface irrigation. We were asked if we could discuss that as part of this workshop. So if Taylor Nakudian is present from the SFPUC.
Yep, I'm here.
Would you like to describe the issue at hand or the matter at hand?
I'm happy to. From our perspective, the other person, Steve, I don't know if he's here today at the
Steve Wilson with Rewater Systems.
Is Steve here today?
He may not be. He wasn't present at our last workshop, our first workshop. But I
Okay.
knew it was part of your comment as well.
He has his own separate comments, so I'm not going to speak for his
Okay.
comments or what
Okay.
his concerns are. I was not able to attend the other workshop either, but I am here at this one, and Steve had reached out to myself to talk about untreated gray water systems for irrigation, as they're currently exempted in the plumbing code. And I just wanted some clarity, I guess, on how those systems are being addressed through this regulation process. You touched on it a bit in your draft regs discussion earlier. So, I mean, from what it looked like, the same language that's in the plumbing code about untreated gray water systems for irrigation is staying. The intention is not to add additional requirements onto those types of systems. Is that correct?
That's correct. The current draft regulations would simply include gray water systems as one of the mandatory options, but they do not propose to make any change to the requirements for those systems that are currently in the plumbing code.
Okay. We are supportive of keeping it like that, basically.
Okay.
When I
That is
did
fine.
speak to Steve, he had additional concerns which I cannot speak to, and so I'll let him raise that at another workshop himself. But my concern was really just to understand what changes were being made to the gray water systems for irrigation. So thank you for clarifying that.
Absolutely, yeah, and thank you for reaching out and glad that we were able to discuss it, and hopefully Steve will attend one of our workshops. I think his issue was raised at our last workshop as an agenda item as well, but he was not present and we didn't have the opportunity to hear his description of it. So I'll reach out and see if he has additional feedback on that item or wants to present to the group. And once we have our document sharing platform for this workshop group, maybe he'll want to share a written comment with the group through that platform.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments or feedback from the group on this matter? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is related items not on the agenda. And this agenda item is for anyone who has new business that they would like to raise that wasn't previously referenced in an agenda item. Beforehand, I do have a few that, as I mentioned, we did not get to add to the agenda before it was issued. And so the first is that issue of economic and fiscal impact information. And just discussing with the group what the best process may be for gathering that information. I know that Bob, you raised this issue, and so if you want to speak to your thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, thank you, Hal. Bob Raymer with Bowman CBPA. Just as we do with non-residential standards, particularly those most recently from the State Fire Marshal's office, we will take and do this a minimal number of times. You don't want to go to your membership 5 or 6 times with similar questions. That's a good way to get no responses. But what we'd like to do for the commercial sector is to farm out a number of different options, basically the code specifications, as well as illustrations showing what compliance looks like to the extent possible. I want to make it as easy as possible for the engineers of these different companies to take a look at this and provide, well, this one is going to cost X, but this one is over here is going to cost a lot less is Y, and be able to retrieve that information and compare it with what we get from water companies and what we get from State Water Resources Control Board. It's just one more effort to try to help the BSC sort of compile the information they're going to need for the initial statement of reasons. So to the extent that I could get some help providing illustrations of what this stuff looks like, and it doesn't have to be drawings, it could be photographs or whatever, but that would be very helpful in putting together sort of a one-off or a two-off request of CBPA's membership. And so since these are going to be the regs that we're considering for implementation in 2029, we've got some time. But if you've got stuff in your back pocket, the other stakeholders that you think we could use in putting together this kind of information request, please forward it to Havel and the rest of the group, and we'll make good use of it. And that's my comment, Havel.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, that would be very useful to us and much appreciated. And the Building Standards Commission is also happy to help format or sculpt questions to your constituents however we can. So I appreciate you bringing that topic up. I see Tom, you have your hand raised? Tom,
yeah, just to this economic and fiscal impact, we need to look at the incremental cost of more water. Not just the cost of the water we have. We're looking at severe water shortages, and the additional water that is needed is going to cost a lot more than the current water that we already have. And you can just look at San Diego. they did the first part of a pure water project, which is taking wastewater and making it into potable water at the utility level. And that resulted in a 60% increase in water costs for consumers. And that's just the first part. And if they go with pure water too, it may double their, the cost to consumers. So, by reducing demand, it reduces the need for these new water sources. And that's the cost that we're looking at when we're talking about cost savings.
Understood. Thank you for that comment. Yeah, that'll definitely be a consideration in our economic and fiscal impact considerations. Any additional comments on the?
Yeah, Mike Kuros, if I may, on the cost issue. So we do know that there is a cost threshold with regards to what is supplied versus what is available. And I appreciate what Mr. Ensel is saying about San Diego, but I'm not sure that clearly is a good thought process, because the reality of what happened down there, I do believe, is with the increase of the use of some of the water that was provided by desalination. We have to look at this thing sometimes. You look at a water agency, they don't manufacture water. They buy water, they sell water, they store water, they bring water down from Northern California. It's a very complex system. So there's no simple answer to that for any one of the water districts. And sometimes maybe a water district may have an issue that led up to that problem. And that clearly is what happened with San Diego. I would say in the totality of the state of California, that is not the case. So I don't think we should be looking at one water district as an argument for the bigger discussion as to what we're trying to achieve here. And again, I think going back to the previous consideration of what we were trying to achieve then, a few years ago with AB 2282, the discussion came up about the ultimate water costs and whether or not the benefit of the water costs exceeded what we were trying to achieve. And the reality is it didn't. And I'm not sure that what we're trying to achieve right now, and this is just an opinion at this point, I'm not sure that what we're trying to achieve right now would ever meet that threshold. But we'll see how it works out in the process.
Thank you for that comment, Mike. Yeah, I don't know that, I don't want to speak for Tom, but I think he was using San Diego just as an example. And our analysis would focus on the entire state and impacts to the entire state as the regulations would be effective throughout the state. So that is definitely a valid.
Thank you. Yeah, we can never just point at one district, because things are going on sometimes with a district that we're totally not familiar as to why the result came out. But you're right, we are looking at this from a state perspective, and that's what we have to look at. Maybe in some of those water districts, we apply some of the things that we're talking about. Maybe that's the way we look at it.
And we'll get a clearer picture of that as we move forward with these draft regulations and are able to collect more precisely tailored economic information. Are there any additional comments on that matter?
This is Tom Ensel. Just one other additional comment on that. This cost analysis also goes to why it's really important, I think, to have much stronger tier 1 and tier 2 standards, because I think there's what's cost effective and feasible throughout the state, but different municipalities have different water supply issues. And I think we want to have good, strong tier 1, tier 2 standards that reflect what's been done in Sacramento and San Francisco, so that those municipalities that see that as necessary in the area to meet their water demands and cost effective are able to go ahead and adopt those tier 1 or tier 2 standards. And that's something that, when we talk about municipal water, concerns, obviously if a local jurisdiction is adopting a tier 1 or tier 2 standards, you know, that's a local political decision that takes into account, you know, all their other, you know, stakeholder input. But I think we want to come up with standards that, you know, are cost effective, mandatory statewide, but also recognize that they may be more cost effective tier one and tier two standards. It's a different cost effectiveness analysis, and it's something, and that cost effectiveness analysis gets really settled at the local level when they decide whether or not to adopt those tiers.
Thank you for that comment, Tom. Yeah, that is a good point, a good indication about why the tier one and tier two requirements are really important, and that it gives the local jurisdictions a more precise lever with which to interact with these standards. And Taylor,
Havel, if I may, add one quick crumb. So what I would look at is California Water Code Section 1355 4.2, and I think that is an area, and I'll repeat it one more time for everyone that's on the line right now, or that'll be following up, looking at this usually. That is Water Code, California Water Code, Section 1355 4.2. And it talks about quite a bit about what we're trying to solve right now. And I'm not in disagreement with what Tom's saying, because we're going to run into areas where we're going to have to be able to apply some of this. And maybe in this process, that's what we ultimately determined and put with the recommendations to the full commission. But at the end of the day, if that's the case, ultimately the local jurisdiction having authority has to have some direction as to understanding how to approve these types of systems and how to make that happen. But as you said, this is a statewide discussion right now, and I think we need to be looking at the bigger picture instead of each smaller chunk of the discussion.
thank you for that comment, Mike. Are there any further comments on this matter of economic and fiscal impact information?
Seeing none.
Seeing none, I had one more topic, which is the topic of the collaboration platform for workshop participants. And that would be a file sharing platform that was suggested at our last workshop so that participants can share useful reference documents with the group, as we've already discussed a number today. And this would be something similar to what was set up for the Calgary Embodied Carbon work group. And we're working on setting up that file sharing platform. And I'll provide further information once we do have it set up through our interested parties list. And also follow up about it in our next workshop. But I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that that had not been forgotten or put aside from our last workshop. And we're working on getting that set up so we can distribute documents and review them throughout the group more easily. Are there any other items not on the agenda that anyone would like to raise at today's meeting? Seeing none, I'll move to adjourn this meeting. I want to thank you all for your participation today, and I look forward to continuing to work with you on this project. Ooh, I'm so sorry. I have the action items. I realized I skipped over. Laura, very importantly. So item number 6, my apologies, action items. The California Building Standards Commission will work to incorporate today's feedback into the draft regulations for consideration in our next meeting, and will likely schedule the next workshop for January of 2026, early January. If you have additional comments or information related to this matter that you would like to share before our next meeting, please reach out to the Building Standards Commission or myself directly through the contact information available on our website. Written comments are especially useful. And once we get our platform for sharing documents with the group, we'll be able to share comments that need to go to the entire group for discussion and review with the group. Does anyone have any final comments on the action items for this meeting? Okay, and seeing none, I will now go to item 7, adjournment. I'll move to adjourn the meeting. I want to thank you all for your participation today, and I look forward to continuing to work with you on this project. So meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank goodness for YouTube, since I didn't start the recording.
Oh, no.
Did you hear it when it said recording in progress in the middle of the meeting?
Oh, I wondered about that.
Yeah, that was